Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Thank you. So recording has started. We will start. Today's lecture is going to be continuation of the classical lamination theory. I have sent two videos about testing of composites. Please have a look. Due to many Tuesdays being missed due to holidays or other reasons, I think it will be difficult to cover everything in person. So for the second half of the testing of composites, that is testing different properties like tensile, compressive, flexural properties. I have shared a 30-minute video which I had prepared last year. Please have a look at that. And if you have any questions, we can discuss, but we will not dedicate a lecture to testing of composites because our next test is on the 9th. And before that, we must finish classical lamination theory. Otherwise, it will become difficult. Okay. So all of you have seen the YouTube link, yes, which I have shared.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So now let us start. So today we will talk about within the framework of the classical lamination theory, how to introduce thermal strains. Okay, let us say our our laminate is subjected to a temperature field, each layer having its own coefficient of thermal expansion. In that case, how can we include this effect into our classical lamination theory that we have studied previously? So if we neglect the hygroscopic strains, the ABD form of the constitutive matrix can be written like this, that NM is equal to ABD normal strain curvature minus NMT. Basically, I am saying ABD into this strain actually is equal to all the different loads that there might be. NM plus NMT plus NMH dot dot dot. So we can write it like this. Okay. Not NT, N superscript T and M superscript T give us the equivalent forces and moments that would have to be applied to cause the same final deformed shape of the plate as that produced by the change in temperature. Okay. So when you're applying thermal, you are actually subjecting your body to a temperature gradient. Due to that temperature gradient, there are going to be resultant forces and moments. So N superscript T and M superscript T are those equivalent forces and moments that would have to be applied mechanically to cause the same final deformed shape as that would be produced by the change in temperature. Further, we can write it like this, that N T at any point X will be equal to summation of K is equal to 1 to N integration over the thickness of the lamina into this term q1 axx plus q12k alpha y q16 alpha xy delta t dz. This is coming directly from our expression of how we have calculated thermal stresses. So it basically I am doing thermal stresses dot dz is equal to nt. This expression is for my thermal stress, which we studied I think few weeks ago. Similarly, MT will be something like this. No, sorry, NTY will be something like this. And NTXY will be something like this. Notice that these terms are changing. Basically, it is Q matrix into alpha X, alpha Y, alpha XY. By component. Here we are doing stress into Z. Okay. I hope you recall this expression. Yes, Q11 alpha X plus Q12 alpha Y plus Q16 alpha XY into delta T is equal to sigma X.
Yes, sir.
And important point to note that the thermal strains are determined from the solution of heat transfer boundary value problem, and in general will be a function of Z as well as X and Y coordinates. It is not going to be only a function of x and y in general. Okay, any questions? Okay. Now let us consider a simple case where I'm saying that the thermal strain is not a function of z. So it is varying in the xy, but through the thickness, the thermal strain is not a function of z. As z varies, thermal strain is not varying, but as x and y is varying, thermal strain is varying. And for symmetrical laminates, you can prove that there will be no moments due to thermal strains. And if your laminate is balanced, then also you can show that nxy is equal to 0. And we already know the transformation equations. We know how to calculate the shear strains. Gamma xy thermal is equal to epsilon 1 minus epsilon 2 into 2mn. And similarly, gamma xy is equal to minus gamma xy. So I can write an equation like this. For a symmetric balanced laminate, I'm getting nx, ny, nxy is equal to a11, a12, a into strains minus thermal stress, thermal moment, thermal loads. Okay. Keep in mind this is symmetric, this is and balanced. For free expansion case, when nx is equal to ny is equal to nxy is equal to 0, we can write it like this. So basically, let's go once. We are saying if my composite is allowed free expansion, means no load is applied. So this will be equal to 0. Once that happens, we can write it our equations like this. We can calculate the thermal strains by inverting the A matrix and multiplying with n superscript Tx and n superscript Ty, where D is actually this A11 by D I am doing because I've inverted the A matrix. So these strains under free expansions are actually the thermal strains in the laminate. This is how we can calculate the effective thermal strains in the laminate. But we can also say that epsilon x naught is equal to effective thermal coefficient into delta T in this case. And similarly, we can have the expressions for efficient thermal coefficient in the y direction. So what is, by looking at this equation and this equation, can you tell me what is the value of first of all, do you understand what alpha x star means? What is
The
the
coefficient of thermal expansion in x direction?
But why this star I am writing?
Sir, it is
Thermal free
effective.
expansion.
It is effective coefficient of thermal expansion for the entire laminate. Okay. So now we can actually use this to derive the expression for effective coefficient of thermal expansion will be equal to something like this. And recall that NT expression we have already discussed few slides before. It was only a material property. Let us go back. NTx is a function of q11 alpha x, q12 alpha y, q16 alpha xy. All of these are material properties. So for a laminate, I have to calculate whatever I have put in the circle for each lamina and add it up over the entire laminate to get this value of NTx. So this is completely a material property. I will go back to my expression. I will calculate NTx, NTy, A11, A12, A12 and multiply and delta T, and then I can get the value of alpha x. So there is NT had a delta T term, NTy had a delta T term, that will cut out. So effective coefficient of thermal expansion has to be independent of the delta T, but this expression has delta T. But keep in mind that the expression of NTX and NTY also had delta T. So delta T will ultimately cancel each other out. It will come out as a material property as it should. Similarly, I can calculate the effective coefficient of thermal expansion in the Y direction. You can also write it in terms of effective laminate stiffness that we have calculated. It will come out to be something like this. The effective laminate stiffness, how to calculate, we had discussed in the previous, I think 2 weeks ago. Okay, good. Any questions on this topic so far?
Sir, here we were assuming a balanced laminate. So what is meant by balanced laminate?
We had discussed now that for every plus theta, there is a minus theta somewhere. A laminate is made in such a way that every lamina which has plus theta orientation also has a minus theta orientation. If we don't make these assumptions, the expressions for coefficient of thermal expansion will become too tedious. We are limiting ourselves to simple cases in this course.
Oh,
Okay.
like, isn't that symmetric, sir?
Symmetric means that I have theta from the central line. If there is one theta above the central line, there should be one theta below the central line. That is symmetric.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay.
I'm saying for every theta, there should also be a minus theta.
Okay, 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 okay.
Because we want these terms to be 0.
Yeah, yeah, okay, sir.
Symmetric B will be 0.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Any questions? If not, we can use the same idea to calculate residual stresses. Okay. When you bake a laminate, it is subjected to temperature stresses, and as it cools down to ambient temperature, there will be some residual stresses. How do we calculate that? Okay. Ply stresses is given by something like this, where I have said sigma k is q into epsilon naught plus z into curvature minus delta t into alpha. For symmetric balanced laminates, I have shown that epsilon naught x is equal to alpha x delta t and alpha y delta t is epsilon naught y. The curvatures, etc., are going to be 0 due to temperature loading. Okay. So the ply thermal strains, I can write it like this. Now, once I have the ply thermal strains, the ply by ply thermal residual stresses can be calculated in this format. And this is how you calculate temperatures, residual stresses. So you will calculate first of all the effective coefficient of thermal expansion, alpha x square, alpha x star, alpha y star, alpha x y star. You already know the coefficient of thermal expansion for each layer, which will be alpha x k, and you know the Q matrix for every layer, and then you can say Q11 into the difference between the two effective of the laminate and alpha of the lamina, the difference between that into Q matrix into delta T. This is your residual stresses. Delta T is TR minus TC. TR is your room temperature. TC is the temperature at which your composite was processed. The temperature inside your autoclave, for example. Delta T will be negative. So your residual stresses most likely are going to be compressive. We are using delta C because that is the upper bound of the temperature. It is going to be less than this, but this will give you an upper bound estimate of the residual stresses. Because at that temperature where Tc is going on, it's unlikely that residual stresses will be taking place, because at that temperature maybe the matrix is still in a liquid phase and you are having some sort of percolation. Remember in our first lecture about manufacturing, we learned about the Cure cycle. At first you increase your temperature so that your matrix is melting, then you increase the temperature so that the viscosity is lower, and then you keep it at that temperature so that all the fibers get wetted, etc., etc. So we are looking at that temperature where the viscosity of the matrix was lower, that very high temperature where we had to keep. At that temperature, obviously residual stresses will not be built, because at that stage the composite is not even built. As it cools down, the residual stresses are going to creep in, but we don't know the exact temperature at which the residual stresses will start. Because of that, we will say that let's use Tc, let's calculate the upper bound estimate of residual stresses. Okay, is this clear? Or should I repeat how residual thermal stresses have been derived? Have a look at this slide and let me know if there are any questions. So what have we done? We have sigma k, stress in a kth layer is this, okay, Q into total strain. For balanced symmetric, we know how to calculate the different strains, okay, and then we have the thermal strains, which come out to be something like this. Using the thermal strains and with the knowledge that I have of the effective coefficient of thermal expansion and the coefficient of thermal expansion for a layer, this difference is actually causing the residual stresses in every layer. So using this difference, multiplying it with the Q matrix and the delta T, we can calculate the residual stresses. Keep in mind that delta T is room temperature minus temperature at which laminate is processed, and delta T is negative. And also Tc is the upper bound estimate, because we don't know inside the autoclave or at any device that we are using at what temperature our residual stresses will start to creep in. At the upper bound, the matrix is liquid. So clearly at that temperature, residual stresses will not start, but to calculate an upper bound, we are taking this value. Okay. Can I go forward?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So, for example, if you were to calculate the residual stresses for our favorite case, 0 plus minus 40, 90, this is what it would look like. The residual stresses in 90 degree, in 0 degree comes out to be positive. This will come out because maybe this value is negative, that alpha k x is greater than alpha x star. Okay, and for the 90 degrees it comes out to be negative. So if I have a 0 plus minus 40, 45 plus 0 plus minus 45, 90 symmetric laminate, the 0 degree laminas are going to be subjected to tensile residual stresses. The 90 degree are going to be subjected to compressive. The 45 degree will have hardly any residual stress. Okay, this is sigma x. This is sigma y. This is sigma xy. And when you look for residual stresses, expectedly the only plus minus 45 degree are getting some sigma xy residual stresses. For 0 and 90 degree, it will come out to be 0. This is coming simply by implementing these expressions that we have discussed. Okay, This is balanced because 0 and 90 are balancing each other out, and plus minus 40 are balancing each other out, and it is also symmetric. This is S. Okay. Okay, so this brings me to an end of the thermal, how to deal with temperature effects within the framework of the classical lamination theory. Is there any question? Can I move forward? Okay, if there are no questions, let me move forward. The next topic that I want to discuss is what is known as the how we can use classical lamination theory for sandwich beams. So a sandwich beam or a sandwich material looks like this, where you have stiff carbon fiber at the top and bottom, and in the middle you have foam. Okay, so as an exercise, can you calculate the D matrix for this laminate sequence? Let's say this is TC, this is TF, this is my central line. So please check and make sure you are getting the same expression for Dij. Calculate Dij if TF/TC is given and Qijf and Qijc are the Q matrix. This is Qijf, and for this is Qijc. By now you should know how to calculate the D matrix. Try to do it manually by yourself and confirm that whatever expression I have written is correct. As a part of this course, one of the most elementary things that you will be expected that you know how to do is you know how to calculate AB and D matrix if the laminate sequence is given to you. That is bare minimum, very basic thing that will be expected from you, not only by us, but if you go for a PhD or if you go for a job somewhere and they want analysis of composite materials, the first thing you probably will do is calculate the ABD matrix. Please make sure you know how to do it correctly and efficiently. So Dij is 1/3 summation n is equal k is equal to 1 to n Qij into Zk cube minus Zk minus 1 cube. So Qij will be equal to 2 into Qijf. So 2 is coming because 1, 2 into Tc plus Tf cube minus Tc cube by 8. This is Tc by 2 plus Tf. This minus Tc by 2 cube will come Tc cube by 8 plus Qij core into Tc cube by 4. It is actually Tc cube Qij into Tc cube by 8 minus 0 into 2. It has been simplified into one step. So you will get your Dij matrix something like this. Dij is equal to Qijf into Tf cube by 6 plus Tf d square by 2 plus Qij Tc cube by 12. Okay. Now you can also write this in terms of the apparent Young's modulus. we know that if a plate is subjected to bending, I can say D is equal to E apparent H cube by 12. If this was one homogeneous plate, remember we have discussed the expression for how to calculate the bending response of a single plate. So we are equating the equation that we have got for D and trying to calculate the apparent Young's modulus. It will come out to be something like this. D is equal to EF into this term. So this first term is the bending stiffness of the skin. Bending stiffness of skin about the neutral axis. So we are first calculating the bending stiffness of every plate and then using parallel axis theorem calculating the bending axis about the central line. So TF cube by 6, you can imagine it to be the bending stiffness about the centroid of the skin. And this TF d square by 2 is coming due to the parallel axis theorem, and EC TC cube by 12 is the bending stiffness of the core. So we have taken a completely different approach, but if you watch carefully, this is very similar to the Euler-Bernoulli equation that we have used and how we calculate the area moment of inertia. Do you remember how we calculate the area moment of inertia for a I-shaped beam? We divide it into 3 rectangles. We calculate the I for each rectangle, and then we use parallel axis theorem so that we have the total I about the centroid. Parallel axis theorem has the term A into Y square. So Y is the distance of the two centroids. So this is something like the same thing that we are getting here also. This term is very similar to the parallel axis theorem results that we have got. Okay, now we can also calculate the strains and stresses if a pure bending moment is applied. If a pure bending moment is applied, then sigma x will be a function of z, will be equal to the apparent Young's modulus mx z by d. Okay, this is, yes, you can calculate the expressions for the face as well as the core. Okay, any questions about this sandwich beam, how we are treating? If not, then let us see. So now when you make sandwich beams, before that, anybody has any point to make about using classical lamination theory for sandwich beams? Can we use it with lots of accuracy or we cannot use it? Recall in our first class, what were the assumptions we have made for what are the Kirchhoff-Love assumptions and when is it valid? Are those conditions also satisfied by sandwich beams? What is the Kirchhoff-Love assumption? Classical lamination theory, very first lecture, we learned about the Kirchhoff-Love assumption. That a line which is straight and perpendicular to the central line remains straight and perpendicular to the central line even after deformation. And then we said that this assumption is valid when certain conditions are satisfied. What are those conditions?
Files are well bonded.
Piles are well bonded, that is one. The laminas are well bonded, this is one. Then
So the plies must be very thin.
plies must be very thin. And one more.
It must not be a
Area
thin.
stiffness difference must be something.
So consecutive layers must not have a very high stiffness gradient. For this sandwich beam, which of these conditions are not satisfied?
Stiffness difference.
Third one.
Stiffness difference between foam and outer layer is going to be very high. This is one. Something else?
The thickness is also two
Thickness
different.
is also very high. So now the question is, because we are still using the classical lamination theory, what physics are we going to miss? What is actually going to happen in real life that which phenomena do you think we are going to miss? In our classical lamination theory, we have assumed that through the thickness, stress components are zero. Based on the different assumptions, each layer was in a state of plane stress. For sandwich materials, can I say that my foam will necessarily be in a state of plane stress? Because it is no longer thin. Can I make that claim?
No, sir.
You cannot make that claim. So usually you will see that if you draw let's say this is my sandwich material, okay, where white is the core, these red lines are my carbon fiber. If you subject it to bending, you can expect to get some cracks like this or like this, depends. So you can expect to get some cracks like this. This is cracks through the thickness of the foam. That is something you will not be able to model. Okay. That being said, it is still a very useful tool. Later we will learn what changes we have to make to the classical lamination theory so that the stress component through the thickness of the foam are also accounted for. The foam is no longer in a state of plane stress. But for the time being, if we use classical lamination theory, we will not be able to model or account for these type of damages where the shear stress is through the thickness. This is sigma, outward normal is z, direction is x. So sigma tau zx terms will not be able to model, and tau zx will cause this strength. If you remember, we have modeled our lamina like this. We have said that this is z, this is x, and perpendicular to my monitor is y. This was the coordinate axis system that we have chosen for classical lamination theory. Now I'm saying that tau zx need not be zero for foams. Tau zx will cause damage like I have shown with the cracks. That we will not be able to model. Okay. But let us look at some simple cases because it is still instructive to understand. Towards the end of this lecture, you will understand why we are doing this. So let us say I have a sandwich material where the core is weak. So the core, I can call it to be less weak if this term EC into TC cube by 12 is less than 1% of this first term. EF So this term EC TC cube is less than 1% of this term. EF TF cube by 6 plus TF d square by 2. When that happens, I will say that my core is weak. When my core is weak, this is the stress distribution that I can expect when it is subjected to bending load only. The top layers are going to get stress. The middle core is not going to get any stress. Okay. In that case, we can calculate the bending rigidity D will be equal to EF into T cube F6 plus TF d square by 2. Basically, we are neglecting this term because my core is weak. And you can also calculate the normal stresses, which will come out to be something like this, which has been plotted here. If you make no assumptions, this is the predicted stress distribution in a sandwich material. If you make this assumption of weak core, this is the stress distribution that you can expect. Similarly, you can make another assumption, which is that my skin is thin. If my skin is thin, TF is tending to 0. So once again, if I go back few slides, now my TF term is tending to 0. So I have EF into TF d square by 2 plus EC TC cube by 12. So my D term will come out to be like this. We can simplify. And the stress distribution will come out to be, since the plies are very thin, the top and bottom, so there is no stress variation across the thickness, and the core is getting less stress. Will come out to be something like this. Okay, you can calculate bending rigidity as well as normal stress. This will happen if T by T divided by D divided by TF square is greater than 33.33, or D by TF if it is greater than 5.77, then you can make this simplification that the skin is thin. Now you can make another assumption that I have thin skin and weak core. In that case, the bending rigidity will come out to be something like this, and the stress distribution is, you can expect it to be something like this. You can also calculate the normal stresses. Okay, so these are some simplifications that will not cause great amount of error, because D by TF to be greater than 5.77 is not unusual. That might happen all the time, and that happens when the contribution in the stiffness due to thickness of the skin is very, very low. So these sort of assumptions we can always make, and we can derive simple expressions for bending rigidity as well as normal stresses. Now, using simple expressions like this, we can now compare the properties of a aluminum plate which is thick, compare that with composite materials which are basically sandwich materials, where I have carbon fiber faces, core in the center, and I have used some adhesive. So now, let us say I have a massive steel plate of 0.4 millimeter thickness, then D by D steel is 1. If I have aluminum of 1 millimeter, then it becomes 6.7. If I have only carbon fiber unidirectional, then this D by D steel will come out to be 73. But if I use a sandwich where the core is 12.5 and the skin is 0.75 millimeters, then the bending rigidity, I can get it up to a factor of 6640 times that of steel. So these are the massive advantages that we are talking about while using sandwich materials for bending applications. It could actually be, I think this is this is specific D by D steel. Okay, so we are also factoring the stiffness density. Like for 1 meter cube of plate of massive steel is 3 kilogram, and then I'm doing D by D steel divided by density, I will get it to be 1. But if I use carbon fiber epoxy and make a sandwich material, I can get the specific bending rigidity 6640 times more than that of steel. These are essentially just coming by this expression that we are using, that D is equal to this term. And you know the density of your carbon fiber, you know density of foam. If you want to plug in those values, think about this number, 6,640 times better specific response to bending. Is this not number huge?
Yes.
Do you understand the analysis that I'm trying to present here?
Yes.
Anybody?
Sir, like,
Yes.
sir, how did we get such a high number, sir? Like, is it because of carbon fiber?
We are getting high number because of two reasons. One, carbon fiber already has high, what do you say? High specific stiffness. Okay, it has high specific stiffness that is already there. Now, and then this formula, where is that? This formula, if you look carefully, there we are increasing the terms rapidly. As you are increasing TC, the response, the value of D is increasing significantly. And D is TC plus TF. So this term is contributing a lot of stiffness just by geometry. It is TF into D square, and TC is a big number. So D square is a big number. So our D value is increasing. The bending rigidity that we are able to achieve is rapidly increasing as I increase the thickness of my core. which basically does not cost me anything. Foam is a very cheap material. It is just a question of placing my carbon fiber layers as far apart as possible.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
But one thing you have to be careful while interpreting this is that this is UD material, unidirectional material, and carbon fiber has very good properties in one direction. In the two direction, it is not so nice. So when we are talking about steel and aluminum, it is isotropic. So whether you bend in the one direction or you bend in the two direction, you are still going to get this value. But when I'm talking about unidirectional carbon epoxy or sandwich which has carbon epoxy in the unidirectional, these are properties only when you bend it in one direction. If you bend it in the other direction, the value is going to be lower. Or in other words, if let's say if I have a, so this is my fiber direction. Okay. Now if I bend in this face, then I will get these numbers. But if I was to bend in the other face, then the numbers will not be so high. Because EF, the Young's modulus of the faces in the two direction are not very high. Am I clear?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, people who are composite enthusiasts will show you this table. Look, composite is so nice, which is true to some extent, but you must take this data with a pinch of salt. This is only when mx is applied. If my is applied, the numbers will plummet. It will be significantly lower because E, the Young's modulus of the face in the two direction, is not going to be as high as Young's modulus in the one direction. Okay, but still, I think this is a very good example of why we should use sandwich materials. Why, you know, the entire floor of the aeroplane, when you are in an aeroplane, is a sandwich material. And most large number of wings are also made by sandwich materials because the floor and the wing, they are basically subjected to bending load. And when you have bending load, making sandwich materials is a very, very bright idea. But that being said, the analysis that we have studied in today's lecture is only useful if you want to have approximate ballpark estimates, or if you are not interested in modeling damage, or if you're not interested in modeling stresses through the thickness. If you want to model all those effects, there is what is known as the, wait, let us finish this. So these equations assume that skins carry the tensile and compressive loads. The cores carry all the shear stresses, which we are not accounting for. Okay, the CLT does not take into account shear deformations in the core. If you want to take into account the shear deformation in the core, you have to use what is known as the Reissner-Mindlin theory. Reissner-Mindlin theory is an upgrade to the Kirchhoff-Love assumption and the classical lamination theory, in the sense that in the classical lamination theory, we said that wherever there is a Z component in the strain, we have calculated it to be 0. This is coming because we said a straight line remains straight. Now, the Reissner-Mindlin said that, so therefore this classical lamination theory is sometimes also known as first order shear deformation theory, because the deformation is only first order. Now, Reissner and Mindlin said that for a sandwich material, that is perhaps not true. We can say that epsilon ZZ is 0, but XZ and YZ need not be 0. So this W0, which was only due to bending in our case in the classical lamination theory, according to the Reissner-Mindlin hypothesis, W0 is bending and out of plane shear. Okay, it means that, so let us say my initial beam was in this purple line. According to the classical lamination theory, it goes to this purple line once again, but this angle is 90 degree, this angle is also 90 degree, where this is my central line, this is my new central line. Reissner-Mindlin says that on top of that, we have to account also for the out of plane shear. Now, because of that, the central line, which was the section which was perpendicular to the central line, is no longer perpendicular to the central line. This angle is not 90 degree. So based on this assumption, at every stage of the classical lamination theory, we have to redo our derivation, and we can account for out of plane shear also. So there can be higher order shear deformation theories. In our course, we only learned first order shear deformation theory, but using theories such as Reissner-Mindlin theory, you can also go for second order, third order, fourth order shear deformation theories. And then based on these theories, you will be able to calculate the out of plane shear or the shear stresses in the core of a sandwich material. Okay. Due to scarcity of time, we will not discuss the Reissner-Mindlin theory, but this is for your information that it does exist. So just because classical lamination theory has various limitations, that does not mean that that is the only theory we have. There are more advanced theories that we can use if the need arises. Okay. So with this, I will end today's lecture. Any questions about today? Yes. Anything at all? Do you want me to repeat anything? Okay, so if not, then I will close this lecture 5 minutes before time, and